Namaste and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Bhagavad Gita class. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Amba Tvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gite Bhavadveshinim Vasudeva Sutan Devam Kamsa Chanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yatkripa Tamaham Vande Paramananda Madhavam. Om, O Mother Bhagavad Gita, we meditate upon you, who were made known to Partha, Arjuna, by the Lord Narayana himself. You who were included in the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. You, the goddess, who rains down the nectar of Advaita, non-dualism, in 18 chapters. You, the destroyer of relative existence. We worship Krishna, teacher of the world, the son of Vasudeva, the supreme delight of his mother Devaki, and the slayer of the demons Kamsa and Chanura. We adore that supremely blissful Madhava, Krishna, by whose grace the mute are made eloquent and the lame are enabled to cross over mountains. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this evening in the Bhagavad Gita class, we will pick up where we left off last time. And so that is Chapter 18, the last chapter of the Gita, and also the longest chapter of the Gita, and verse 33. So for review, let us just come back to verse 29 of chapter 18, where Sri Krishna tells Arjuna that he is going to explain to him the threefold classification of buddhi and dhriti. Buddhi means the highest part of the mind, usually translated intellect, but as I've said on many occasions, that's a very poor translation. That what we think of as the intellect nowadays is really the lower mind, the manas, which questions and doubts. Vikalpatmaka is the definition of the manas, the lower part of the mind, that which has doubts and questions about things. And the buddhi is that which gives definitive knowledge, which gives clear knowledge. The buddhi is the intuitive faculty, using the word intuitive in its true higher sense, not having a hunch, but that is clear, definitive knowledge, the clear sense, authoritative sense that this is true. That's given by the buddhi. So Sri Krishna is saying that he's going to explain to Arjuna the buddhi in its threefold division according to whether it is sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. Remember that in this part of chapter 18, Sri Krishna is talking about the three gunas, the three qualities, or really they're the three constituents of nature. All of nature, from the physical to the mental to the level of the minor deities. Everything is governed by the three gunas. Everything is a manifestation of the three gunas. So he's going to describe buddhi according to these three gunas, and then dhriti, that is fortitude. So the power of intelligence, whether it's sattvic, or rajasic, or tamasic, and then fortitude, that is the power to accomplish, the power to do, whether that is sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. And so what we covered last time was the buddhi. So let me just read the translation of 30 through 32, where he tells about the sattvic buddhi, rajasic buddhi, and tamasic buddhi. So first 30, he says, O Partha, that intellect, that buddhi, is born of sattva, which understands action and withdrawal from action, when to act and when to withdraw from act, and to be still. It understands duty and what is not duty. Yes, this is duty. This, I may think it's duty, but no, it's not. I know that this is just an assumed responsibility I've taken on because of attachment, not because it's actually my duty. And understands fear and fearlessness, bondage and freedom. That is, what is bondage, what is freedom, what is fear, and what is fearlessness. So the sattvic buddhi is one which understands all of these things clearly, knows what is what from a higher perspective. Then 31, he says about the rajasic buddhi, O Partha, that intellect is born of rajas, the quality of passion and action and reaction, involvement, and so forth. That intellect is born of rajas, with which one wrongly understands virtue and vice, as also what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. So here I should explain that confusion is the quality of tamas. So here when he says that one wrongly one understands virtue and vice and what ought to be done and what ought not to be done, it's not speaking of the complete confusion of tamas, but it is the misunderstanding which comes because of attachment. Again, the primary driving force in rajas, or the two forces which are associated. One is egotism, egotism, and the other is attachment. And so it's that misunderstanding of what is virtue and what is vice, which comes because of attachment. Because I'm so attached, because I'm so attracted by things, I use the sense of virtue and vice in order to justify my actions. And what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. There also, because of my attachment, I misuse the understanding of virtue and vice and dharma and adharma, what ought to be done and what not ought to be done, in an effort to justify my attachment. And then 32, about the tamasic buddhi, he says, O Partha, that intellect is born of tamas, which being covered by darkness, considers vice as virtue, and verily perceives all things as contrary to what they are. In fact, that last part, it perceives all things as contrary to what they are. That's the very definition of ignorance according to the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. That one thinks that which is impure as actually pure, that which is unpleasant to be pleasant, that which is undesirable to be desirable. That is the very definition of ignorance according to Patanjali. And so here he says that the tamasic intellect, being covered by the darkness of confusion, the darkness of ignorance and the darkness of confusion, considers vice as virtue. And as I explained last time when dealing with this verse, even the criminal justifies his or her criminal actions by explaining them. Well, I had to kill this person because of such and such, and I stole from them because they deserved it. And so they come up with some explanation for why they did it, meaning they are explaining their vice as a virtue, just what he's saying here, and perceives all things as contrary to what they are. They see pleasure in things that bring us tremendous pain and suffering. And they avoid the things that would help them. That is, they see the things that would bring good to them as being very bad and distasteful. So everything is seen contrary to what it is. So now we come to verse 33, where we were to take up tonight. And verse 33 says, Dhritya yaya. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having having trouble reading nowadays. Fine print. Dhritya yaya dharayate manah pranendriya kriyaha yogena vyabhicharinya dhriti sa partha sattviki. So here, again, he has just described the buddhi, the highest part of the mind, the intelligence, the intuitive intelligence, according to sattva, rajas, and tamas. Now he's taking up dhriti, that is fortitude. And he says that dhritya yaya dharyate manah pranendriya kriya yogena abhicharinya dhriti sa partha sattviki. O partha, that dhriti, that here he translates it with a good phrase, persevering effort. So dhriti can mean fortitude, or here a better translation is what he uses here, persevering effort. That persevering effort is sattvic, which by which one restrains the functions, the pranendriya, mana pranendriya kriya, by which one restrains the functions of the mind and the prana. And the indriyas, yes, that by which one controls the mind, the vital force, and the sense organs, the organs of sense and the organs of action. That is the 5 organs of sense: hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, tasting, and the 5 organs of action: holding, locomotion, speaking, etc. So, O Partha, the persevering effort which is associated, the rest of the translation is clumsy and unnecessarily so, the one given here. So let me try to rework it. The verse is one of those where the words are in the English word order would be completely different from what is given in the Sanskrit, which makes it difficult to search for the words and put them together in English unless you're doing it on paper. So partha, that persevering effort is sattvic, governed by sattva guna, by which the mind, the vital force, and the organs of sense and action are controlled and which is ever associated with yoga, yogena vyabhicharinya dhriti, that persevering effort, which is unceasingly governed by yoga. So here he interprets yoga as meaning samadhi, because in the second sutra of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, it says yoga chitta vritti nirodha. That yoga means the complete cessation of the activities of the mind, and that is the higher samadhi. And so he, with good reason, interprets the yoga here as samadhi. So he says, O Partha, the persevering effort which is ever associated with samadhi, and with which one controls the functions of mind, vital force, and the organs, etc. I don't like that as much, using yoga as a samadhi, because that is referring to an extremely high state. And one can attain to a relative state of sattva before one has attained to complete immersion in the absolute quiescence of mind. So one who is taking the simple meaning of the verse, I would say, O Partha, that persevering effort which is ever associated with yoga, that is, with self-control, with which one restrains the functions of the mind, the vital force, and the organs, that fortitude is born of sattva. That persevering effort is born of sattva. So sattva, sattvic dhriti, sattvic persevering effort, is one which is ever associated with yoga, that is, with concentration, which includes the control of the mind, control of the vital force through pranayama and other practices. Japa also leads to control of the vital forces. Meditation leads to that also. And the organs of action and the organs of sense. So that is sattvic, persevering effort. And then in 34, he says, Yayatu dharma kama arthan dhritya dharayate arjuna prasangena phalakangshi dhriti sa partha rajasi. So sadhriti partha rajasi, that persevering effort is rajasic, O partha, by which yayatu dharma kamarthan dhritya dharyate arjuna, by which one holds on to dharma, that is righteousness, kama, and artha. Remember that the four fruits of life according to Hinduism, the four legitimate fruits of life according to Hinduism are dharma, that is righteousness, artha, possession, or wealth, possession, which is the basis of wealth, and kama, sense pleasure. So it's considered that if you seek sense pleasure and you seek wealth in a dharmic way, that is in a righteous way, then that's legitimate. And the fourth is moksha. So moksha comes when you give the other three up. When you say that, no, I'm no longer interested in sense pleasure, I'm not interested in possession, I want to be free. And I've been established in dharma and righteousness. Now my mind has become pacified. And so now even social righteousness I give up. Not that I become unrighteous or immoral, which is a better word here instead of righteous, which sounds is always associated with self-righteousness. It's not that one becomes immoral, it's that one goes beyond the social dictates because one is established in basic morality. And one is no longer interested in using that righteous behavior in order to secure possessions and sense pleasures. So one goes beyond all of that and seeks freedom alone. That's why Swami Turiyananda told Guru Das Maharaj, the great American monk of our order, one of the first monks of the order, told him that in the West you seek to be good people. We seek to be free. Now, that doesn't mean that all Hindus seek to be free rather than to be good, but it means that the highest ideal in Hinduism is freedom, not being a good person. Being a good person is just sort of the baseline. That's where you start. But the desire to be free is not limited to being a good person. So he was comparing the highest ideal of Hinduism with the highest ideal of Christianity, where being a good person is the highest ideal. By being a good person and devoted to God and accepting Jesus, etc., then one is saved. But one is still a sinner, and so still one has to try to be a good person. But in Hinduism, you seek to go beyond dharma and adharma, beyond morality and immorality, by becoming free of both. So the running translation, but O Partha, the persevering effort with which one, becoming desirous of the fruits because of an intense attachment, yes, that prasangera, palakangshi, again on this verse 34, palakangshi means desiring the fruits of action. One perseveres in dharma, seeking possessions and seeking sense pleasure, out of attachment and with a desire for fruits, palakangshi, and prasangena, out of attachment. So, O Partha, the persevering effort with which one, becoming desirous of the fruits because of intense attachment, holds on to righteousness, holds on to objects of pleasure, and holds on to wealth, that fortitude is based in rajas. So again, remember, rajas is centered around egotism and attachment that comes out of egotism. And so the egotistical person who is attached, who is passionate, they seek the fruits of their actions. They're highly attached to the fruits of their actions. If they give something in charity, they want to get something back at least name and fame, at least that they want to get back. Because of the high attachment and the egotism, that they want their name spread everywhere. And so such a person is desiring the fruits of their actions, and they seek righteousness, sense pleasure, and possession because of their attachment. And so they hold on to, or they have a persevering effort which is rajasic, governed by that egotism and that passion. So then he comes to the tamasic in verse 35. Yaya swapnam bhayam shokam visharam vadameva cha navimunchati durmedha dhriti sa partha tamasi. So sap dhriti partha tamasi, O partha, that persevering effort is tamasic, which yaya swapnam bhayam shokam visharam vadameva cha navimunchati durmedha. Uh, that persevering effort, O Partha, is tamasic, which does not give up sleep, fear, sorrow, depression, and intoxication, because of the lack of intelligence. So the running translation, O Partha, that persevering effort, that dhriti, due to which one does not give up sleep, fear, sorrow, despondency, as also sensuality. Oh, that's the way he translates madam, which also is okay. It could be intoxication or sensuality. That fortitude, which is incapable of discrimination, is born of tamas. So the tamasic persevering effort, tamasic fortitude, is incapable of discrimination. It's durmedha. It's lacking in intelligence. It's lacking in insight, lacking in discrimination. And such a person holds on to sleep. They hold on to ignorance. They hold on to fear, sorrow, despondency, and sensuality. All of these things they hold on to. So again, the sattvic dhriti, persevering effort, is that which is joined with yoga, the effort to concentrate the mind, to control the mind, the vital force, the prana, and the organs of sense and of action, organs of knowledge and of action. That is the sattvic effort. So a sattvic person will try to keep the mind concentrated, try to keep the mind in a state of equilibrium, not sleepy equilibrium, but wakeful equilibrium, in a receptive, alert and receptive state, calm, reflecting that which comes before it as it is, without projecting ego into everything, that sees things as they are. So that is the sattvic effort. And the rajasic effort is that which, again, injects ego and attachment into everything, which does everything with a view to self-benefit. How is this going to benefit me? If I give money for this cause, are people going to notice? Is my name going to be in the newspapers? Is the press going to be there to cover what I am doing, etc.? That is the concern of the rajasic mind. And it's attached, and it seeks sense pleasure and possession, wealth, and dharma also. But dharma, again, all of these things in service to one's own self and one's own attachment and one's own desire for the fruits of action. So that is the rajasic effort. And the persevering effort or fortitude of the tamasic person is that which is governed by sleep, by ignorance, by what were the other things? Fear, sorrow, despondency. So yes, when we find ourselves in a despondent state, then we should recognize that that's the tamasic state and try to shake ourselves out of it. We should push ourselves to get active, to do something, even if it's to play a game or something, just to get the mind and body active so we get out of that despondent state. Now, let me put a qualification on that. Say if a loved one dies, naturally we're going to grieve, and that is okay. That is natural. That we shouldn't try to deny and try to pretend that we're not going to grieve. That it's okay to feel that sorrow for some time. But as it goes on lingering, then the time comes when we have to get up and we have to assert ourselves. And in the ordinary course of life, you hear the news and everything looks very grim in the news, as it does nowadays oftentimes and has for some years. Then you find that you become despondent just thinking about all of the troubles in the world or in this country or whatever country we're in. Then stir yourself up to activity. Stir up some rajas within yourself, because when you lapse into despondency, yes, despondency or sadness is a legitimate response to certain situations which naturally are going to cause us to be sad. But it's wallowing in that which becomes the problem. So don't allow yourself to wallow in despondency. Don't allow yourself to sink into a state of depression. When you find that, then get up, do something, wash the dishes, cook something, cut the grass, do some exercise, go to the gym, play a game, do something to stimulate whatever will stimulate you to activity, to get some rajas flowing in yourself. So again, tamas, besides being clouding, besides being confusing, besides being dark and so forth, it's associated with sleep. It's associated with laziness. It's associated with ignorance. It's associated with fear. That is contraction. Fear is a contracting sentiment. So again, there's situations where our natural response is going to be fear. If someone comes and tries to harm you, of course you're going to be afraid. So it's not talking about that. It's not talking about an immediate response to an immediate situation. But again, not allowing yourself to live in a state of fear. If you're walking on the path and you almost step on a snake, then of course you jump back in fear. There's not a problem with that. The problem is after that, you go on dreaming about snakes and thinking about snakes and thinking, oh, I could have died. What if it had bitten me? And you can't get out of that state. So again, a sad response, a fearful response to an immediate, legitimate fear-producing or sadness-producing situation, that is a natural mental response. But don't allow yourself to stay in that, because then you are pulled by that experience into tamas. So the sattvic buddhi, the rajasic buddhi, and the tamasic buddhi, which we dealt with last time, and this time the sattvic persevering effort, the rajasic persevering effort, and the tamasic persevering effort. So why, again, I've answered this question in previous classes, but let me answer it again. Why is he talking so much about the three gunas? Because we need to see their operation within ourselves. It's not to judge other people. Oh, look at that tamasic person over there. Or look at that rajasic. Oh, they're so rajasic. Or that person is so tamasic. I don't like tamasic people. No, it's not for judging others. It's for seeing the operation within ourselves, understanding it so that we can, when we see ourselves lapsing into tamas, we can stir ourselves into rajas. And then once we attain to rajas, then move further into sattva, so that we see the functioning of these three. And when we find ourselves in a sattvic state, to try to maintain that as long as we can, to recognize it and to recognize, yes, this is what I want. Let me participate with this as long as it will stay. Yes, until we have attained to a very high state, is not going to last, a sattvic state. It will come and it will go like the other states come and go. But if we're watchful, if we see the sattvic state, then we can persevere in it longer than we could otherwise. And we can by noticing it, reproduce it more easily. That's very important in the practice of meditation. If after long practice of meditation, there come moments from time to time when the mind becomes tranquil and you seem to be approaching a state of meditation, even if you're not in an actual state of meditation, but you're approaching it, then you feel the different quality of mind when you're approaching a meditative state, when the mind has become calm. And then that, after you've experienced it a few times, that creates a samskara, a mental impression, which then you can use to bring yourself back to that. When you're sitting for meditation, you're trying to do japa, or you're trying to visualize, you're trying to think of the self, whatever, and you find the mind is doing its normal thing, running all over the place. You can remember what it felt like to be in a state of calm tranquility with the mind somewhat, at least somewhat concentrated, and you can try to pull the mind back into that because you have something to pull it back to. You have a memory of an experience that you can pull the mind back to. And so by watching the mind, watching the body, watching our states, as governed by the three gunas, we gradually gain a type of self-knowledge, not Atmavidya, not knowledge of the higher self, the transcendent self, but a knowledge of the phenomenal self, of the mind and body. That knowledge also is critical in spiritual life, to get a knowledge of the mind and body as far as those two influence our spiritual practice. So by getting that knowledge of tamas, rajas, and sattva, and how these three gunas govern the different parts of our being, and how one changes into the other, then we can gradually practice establishing a sattvic state in simple ways. Spiritual life doesn't have to be complicated and difficult. In simple ways, we can practice it. For instance, if we're doing something, an ordinary routine job that maybe is not our favorite job, like washing dishes. Some people like washing dishes. A lot of people don't like washing dishes, which is understandable. So say we're washing dishes and we're trying to rush through because I really don't want to do this. I want to be doing something else. I don't like doing this. When you catch yourself doing that, you recognize that that is rajas, which is making you impatient with the process. When you recognize that I have to wash dishes because I'm going to need them later or others are going to need them later, so either consideration for myself or consideration for the family or whoever I'm living with, I recognize that I have to keep the dishes clean. After I've used them, I have to wash them. So let me just calmly do it. And when I find myself thinking, oh, I wish I could just get through with this and get rid of it and get on to something else, then stop. No, you're in a rajasic state. Come back to a sattvic state and just realize, let me be here now. Let me wash the dishes. I don't have to do it slowly. I can do it quickly, but I can do it well and present with what I'm doing and not thinking about, oh, I've got to get rid of this. Or if I'm doing some other work which I have to do but I don't really like, and I find myself getting impatient and feeling resentful and thinking, oh, I wish I didn't have to do this, stop. And if it's something that you don't need to do, then yes, give it up. But if there's a reason why you should be doing this, then recognize, no, this is what I am doing. Let me do it with full attention and just be here with what I'm doing. Then you find that you begin to find joy in everything that you do. Every task begins to bring you joy, because sattva is the state that brings us joy. How? And why is despondency and so forth associated with tamas? And happiness, or superficial happiness and sadness associated with rajas, where it's action and reaction. It's because when the joy is inside of each of us, joy is the nature of the self. The Atman is the source of all joy. There's no joy out there for any of us. Joy is always here. Joy is always experienced inside. You may get something you wanted and feel happy that I have it, but it's not the thing that gave you joy. It's the experience of being satisfied for a moment. that makes the mind calm so that you feel the joy which is naturally inside comes out. It's the restlessness of mind, the upsets within the mind, the unfulfilled sense that we have in the mind that keeps us from experiencing joy. So if we can bring the mind to a sattvic state, then joy becomes natural. So even whether we're washing dishes, whether we're digging in the garden, whether we're sweeping the floor, if we can bring ourselves to a sattvic state, we find joy in the midst of it. Because joy is not determined by what we're doing or or anything in the outside world, is dependent only on the mental state. So learn to protect your mental state. Study the gunas, learn the gunas, observe the gunas, and then learn how to keep bringing the mind back to a sattvic state. So this is dhriti and buddhi according to the three gunas. Before this, in the previous verses to these, he had discussed the three gunas as applied to action, knowledge. First was knowledge, and then action, and then agency. That knowledge which is sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic, that action which is sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic, and that sense of agency, I am the doer, the sense of agency which is governed by these three. And now he has just discussed these the three qualities applied to the buddhi, the highest part of the mind, and dhriti, persevering effort or fortitude. So remember that the buddhi is functioning in all of us, even in the lowest of us. The buddhi is there functioning. But it's only in the sattvic person that the buddhi has come into its free action. Swami Ashokananda, one of the great swamis of our order, he compared the buddhi in most people to the state of great scientists and intellectuals during the Cultural Revolution in Red China. During the Cultural Revolution in the 60s in China, when Mao told young people to go out and revolutionize society, and there was freely people were being killed, and professors and great scientists and writers and artists were taken from their positions in the universities and other institutions, and they were made to go to re-education camps where they had to shovel manure and dig in the fields and so forth. Yes, you can make a great scientist or a great writer or a great thinker. You can make them spend their whole life doing nothing but shovel manure. If you have the army to back you up, you can make them do that. But is that the best use for society of the great minds of society? Is it the best use of the great minds to make them do nothing but shovel manure? So in the same way, our buddhis are usually made subservient to the senses. They're shoveling the manure of our ordinary everyday experience and our ordinary everyday attachments and delusions. And so, yes, the buddhi can be made subservient to those activities, but it's by coming to a state of sattva that the buddhi attains its true glory and its true functioning, just as the great scientist or the great mind brought out of the re-education camp at the end of the Cultural Revolution, and once again put in institutions of research and so forth, then they can be of true benefit to society. Anyone can shovel manure, but now the great minds are once again freed to do that which they've been trained to do, that which they are best at doing. And so by bringing the buddhi into a sattvic state, we're liberating the buddhi. So that's the importance of this subject. And so then we come to verses 36 and 37, which here he takes together, and I'll take them together also. Sukham tvidanim trividham shrinu me bharatarashabha abhyasad ramate yatra dukhantam cha nigacchati yattaragre divam. Yes, I'm having more and more trouble reading. In Devanagari, many letters look similar and they're sort of blurring for me now, but let me try again. Yattadagre vishamiva parimane mritopamam tatsukham satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam. So sukham tu idanim trividham shrinu me Bharatarshapa. O Bharatarshapa, O bull of the Bharata dynasty, O best of the Bharatas, it indicates. Hear from me the three kinds of joy. The joy according to the three gunas again, continuing the three gunas, the three types of joy. Abhyasad ramate yatra dukhantam cha nigacchati. That which one delights in out of practice, and through which one attains the cessation of sorrow. This knowledge of the three types of joy will lead one to overcoming or to the cessation of sorrow. And then yattadagre vishamidam pariname mritopamam tatsukham satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadanam. So that which in the beginning becomes like poison, vishamopamam. Let's see, where did it go? Taragre vishamiva pariname amritopamam. That which in the beginning is like poison, but which in the end is like nectar. Tatsukam satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasaranam. That happiness is sattvic, which in the beginning seems like poison, but in the end is like the nectar of immortality, and which is which comes from the grace or the clarity of the perception of the self. Atma buddhi prasadanam, prasadajam, born from, produced from the Atma buddhi prasada. Which is produced from the clear perception of the, or identification with the self, Atma Buddhi, the identification with the self. So the running translation is, now hear from me, O Arjuna, O best of the Bharatas, as regards the three kinds of joy, sukham, that in which one delights owing to habit and certainly attains the cessation of sorrows. Yes. So here he's beginning the definition of the sattvic joy. So first he says, now hear from me, O scion of the Bharata dynasty, as regards the three kinds of joy. That's the first line of verse 36. From the second line of 36 through the end of 37, he defines sattvic joy. That in which one delights owing to habit, or which one delights owing to practice, abhyasad, out of practice. And practice, of course, is that which develops into habit. When we practice something enough, it becomes our habit. And so that's why he translates it as habit. And I use the root translation of practice. So that in which one delights owing to practice and certainly attains the cessation of sorrows. So through the sattvic happiness, one attains to it through practice, through regular practice, till that has become a habit. And through that, one comes to the cessation of sorrow, because that happiness, based on habit, becomes one's regular state. That which in the beginning is like poison, but in the end is like the nectar of immortality. So what does that mean? That means that the sattvic happiness is that which to most people looks dreadful. Most people, if they were given the opportunity, well, you can go and join an ashram, you can live a spiritual life, you can give up all of your worldly cares, you can live a life of discipline and meditation where you'll be studying, you'll get up every morning at an early hour, you'll sit for a couple of hours of silent meditation, then you'll recite the scriptures, and then you'll do some service to the teacher and to his ashram or her ashram. But you'll spend all of your time within the confines of the compound, practicing self-discipline and so forth. If you offer that to most people, they'll run as fast as they can to get away. So it appears like poison. It appears like, oh, no, you have to give up so many things. Yeah, there's so many things that you can no longer do. You have to practice discipline. You have to practice self-control 24 hours a day and so forth. It seems like poison to the average person. But in the end, a person who succeeds in taking it up and does it, they find in time that that has been the greatest blessing in their life, the greatest blessing in their life, that they lived this type of life. Even for those who are attracted to this type of life, oftentimes in the beginning, it seems like poison. It seems like, oh, I can't do this. This is so hard. I can't do it. I don't know if I can last. But those who do last, they find that that was the greatest blessing of their life. Through practice, that becomes their norm. That becomes the way that they live. That becomes the baseline of their life. And that brings great joy, a great internal calmness, a great internal sense of security and a sense of freedom. And so it becomes the source of nectar. So that in which one delights owing to habit, and certainly attains the cessation of sorrows, that which in the beginning becomes like poison, but in the end becomes comparable to nectar, and which arises from the clearness of the comprehension of the self. That is, one begins to get the Atma Buddhi Prasara, the grace of the identification with the self. So here he translates it as the clearness of the comprehension of the self, or the grace of the identification with the self, Atma Buddhi Prasadam. Through that type of life, one begins to have, and even long before one can actually realize fully the Atman, one's mind becomes devoted to the Atman. It becomes identified with the Atman, at least in intention. That itself brings great joy. That joy is spoken of as sattvic. So that is sattvic joy, which comes as a result of the mind being attuned with the Atman, the mind being focused on the Atman. So yes, this can be understood in a devotional sense just as well, just as good. The mind which is devoted to God, the mind which is attached to God, the mind which is filled with the thought of God, that mind becomes full of joy. So whether it's full of God or whether it's full of the self, because the two eventually are the same reality. It arises from the clear comprehension of the self or the clear comprehension of God. That joy is spoken of as sattvic joy. And then 38 says, Vishayendriya samyogad yattad agre mritopamam pariname vishamiva tatsukam rajasam smritam. So Vishaya Indriya Samyogad, that which comes from the joining of the sense organs with their objects, the tongue with taste, the nose with pleasant smell, the eyes with beautiful sights, the ears with beautiful sounds, the touch with a pleasant tactile sense. So that which seems like nectar in the beginning, that which is like nectar in the beginning, in which arises from the contact of the senses with their delightful objects. Pariname vishamiva, but which changes into poison. So that joy which starts like nectar when your senses are joined to the objects of the pleasures, but which ends in the experience of poison, the terrible reaction that comes from that. Tatsukam rajasam smritam. That happiness is known as rajasic, born of rajas. Again, rajas, the guna of egotism, of attachment, of action and reaction, of passionate involvement, and going up 1 minute and coming down the next, strong likes and dislikes, and oh, I'm so happy, and oh, I'm so sad. All of that, that is the rajasic nature. And so such a person they are attracted because of attachment, because of desire for the fruits of action and so forth. They are attached to pleasure. And so, yes, we're talking about the vast majority of ordinary people. That's the state where most people are. Even spiritual aspirants, we start there. That's where we are. It's that which we're trying to work out of. And so, those who are attached to the objects of the senses, who want to enjoy the pleasures of the world, it's so wonderful to get something nice to eat, so wonderful to feel something which is so soothing to the skin, and all of that. But because of the fact that superficial sensory happiness is tied to sensory misery. It's the same nerves which carry pain as those that carry pleasure to the mind. And so enjoyment always brings a reaction. And so that joy is referred to as born of rajas, which arises from the contact of the objects with their organs, and which is like nectar in the beginning, but like poison in the end. So just the opposite of sattvic pleasure, which seems so difficult and unpleasant in the beginning. Who wants to live like that? Who in the world would want to live like that? That's miserable. I want to be happy. That's miserable. But one who takes it up finds in time that that was the greatest blessing of their life. Whereas most people seek immediate pleasure by joining themselves to things that they want, pleasurable experiences. But it always leads to reaction. And so if we want that, we'll have it. Vedanta or the scriptures, they're not out to take pleasure away from anyone. No, have all that you want. And if you enjoy tamas, then remain in tamas. That's fine. Remain there as long as you will. But a time will come when you find that, why am I doing this to myself over and over and over again? I'm repeating the same stupid mistakes all of the time, running after things that in the end cause me so much misery. And so then one begins to seek something higher. And then 39, he takes up tamasic happiness. Yadagre chanubandhe cha sukham mohanamatmanaha nidralasya pramadotham tattamasamudahritam. So yadagre cha anubandhe cha sukham mohanamatmanaha. So that joy which in the beginning and at the end, both in the beginning and at the end, deludes oneself. Mohanamatmanaha is the cause of delusion to oneself. That which in the beginning of experience and the end of experience is causing delusion, and which arises from nidra, sleep, alasya, laziness, and pramada, and intoxication. So that which comes from these three things, tat tamasam udaharadam, that is described as tamasic. So that is tamasic happiness, which in the beginning and in the end causes delusion. So remember, sattvic happiness, or the cause of sattvic happiness, looks like poison in the beginning, but it becomes like nectar once you engage in it long enough. And rajasic looks like nectar in the beginning. It's so attractive, so beautiful, so wonderful. But in the end, you find that you were made miserable. You were bound down by that attachment to pleasures, and you suffer a misery for it. So in the end, it's like poison. So one is like poison in the beginning, but it ends by being nectar for the long term. The other looks like nectar in the beginning, but it ends in utter misery. But tamasic happiness, that is delusive in the beginning and in the end. And it arises out of sleep, out of laziness, and out of intoxication. That is tamasic happiness, sukham. So that joy, as the running translation here has it, that joy is said to be born of tamas, which both in the beginning and in the sequel is delusive to oneself, and it arises from sleep, laziness, and intoxication. So yes, does that mean that we're not supposed to sleep? Yes, all of us. every day we pass into a tamasic state, a deep tamasic state, the state called sleep, because that's necessary in order to refresh the body and mind. But there's sleep which is necessary, and then there's a sleep which is just overindulgence in sleep. In school, I had a school, it wasn't a school friend, but an acquaintance in my class who used to sleep 15 hours a day. 15 hours a day. If he had 15 minutes between classes, he would go to his room and lie down for 5 minutes. So he'd walk to his room 5 minutes, lie down for 5 minutes, and then walk to the next class for 5 minutes. And would sleep for 15 hours a day. So that is a deep state of tamas, and that where one feels lazy. Yes, all of us sometimes we feel lazy. But if that's because we're tired and we're legitimately tired, then rest and then come back to activity. But if it's just becoming a state, it's just becoming, you just can't get yourself out of this lazy state. You've had enough sleep, you've had enough rest, but you're just still feeling lazy about everything, then no, stir yourself up. Even if it's to go play a game or something, a computer game or anything is better than just being in a tamasic state of laziness. If again, if it's not caused by insufficient rest. So we'll stop here, and I will give announcements. And if there are any questions at the end of the announcements, I will answer those, because the last time I wasn't able to get to questions. So for announcements, on Thursday we will have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class at 7:30 or at 11 o'clock in the morning. Sorry, Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, Thursday 11 a.m. live streamed. On Sunday I will speak on a topic in the series Basic Concepts of Vedanta, and the concept I will take up this Sunday is jnanam, knowledge. What is knowledge according to Vedanta? And then next week we will continue with our classes. This class on Tuesday night at 7:30, and again the gospel class continuing Thursday mornings at 11. So those are all of the announcements for now. Are there any questions, Surenji? Yes. Yes. So the question is, Surenji is saying that I mentioned that most of us are in a rajasic state. So how do we convince one to move from a rajasic state to a sattvic state? Because for many people, by the time we realize what state we're in, life is already over, and the game is over for this time. And yes, that's the tragedy of life. First thing is, we can't make anyone, of course, move, and that I'm sure that wasn't the intent of Suren's question, but let me clarify it, that we can't make anyone move from rajas to sattva. A person has to perceive the need for it. One has to perceive that I've had enough of rajas. People who haven't had enough of rajas, they're not going to move out of it. That's the great mistake that religions that believe we only have one life here make, like Christianity and Islam. They believe that there's only one life, there's not rebirth, and so everything is decided by what we do in this life. So you have to do it right in this life. And that makes people who are the type of person who is always sort of a control freak over other people. It makes them go out and try to whip people into, and I don't mean literally, though sometimes it has been literally, but at least figuratively, try to whip people into submission to religion, that you have to be, or you have to behave like this, and therefore you get religious law, whether it's Sharia law in Islam or Christian equivalents. There's not a name for it, but we know the phenomenon among those who are fanatical, where everybody has to adhere to a religious code of conduct. The problem is that the people who institute those laws themselves are not following it, and so they're filled with disingenuous control of other people, oppression of people, horrible, horrible things have been done in that name. No, you cannot make a person turn to religion. Leave people alone. I say that often nowadays, but that's because it's so important. Leave people alone. If a person doesn't want religion, let them enjoy what they can. If they're at a stage where they're enjoying life or getting some enjoyment from life, then let them enjoy it. That's a terrible thing that there's institution of religious laws to try to control everybody and make everybody behave in a particular way. That doesn't come from a good place. So leave people alone. As for oneself, and that's of course the intention of Suren's question. As for oneself, it comes from learning the distinction between the gunas and then trying to move in that direction. And because of the idea of rebirth, punarjanma, rebirth, reincarnation, then whatever progress I can make in this life is going to be to my good, my permanent good. If I can make a little progress in this life, in the next life I'll start from a much better position. And oftentimes I think for a sincere person, and I'm talking about ordinary people like us, but who are sincere, that if we progress a little bit in this life, then after death we go for some time to an intermittent state, a state where we can understand many things. So when we come back, it's not that we start right where we left off. We start off even a little higher than that. So whatever we do in this life, that's a permanent gain. So let us do what we can. So don't try to make other people religious. Leave people alone. But try to understand for yourself what is really good for you and what has been the cause of your misery, and then move towards that which is for your permanent benefit as much as you are capable in this life, and that itself will be enough. That will do you great good. So now, since Bhagavad Gita online classes are coming to an end, can we expect a textual translation in the future with your commentary and notes? That would, I'm not going to promise anything, Jack, on that. There are lots of Gita translations and commentaries, so I won't promise anything there. And on a personal note, I also find classic Gita translations like that of Madhusudana Saraswati good, but less contemporary. Yes, and that's the problem. His commentary is very good, full of deep understanding and wisdom. He was not just a great Sanskritist and a great scholar, but a great saint also. So his commentary is full of insight, but it is addressed to traditional India. And so, yes, there is a great need for translations and commentaries which address the modern sensibility. Translations which address the cultural differences as well. Translation which addresses the Indian temperament and the modern Indian situation, as well as those that are geared towards the Western temperament and sensibility. Because the Gita, as all great scriptures are larger than the cultural context in which they were born. They teach truths which are much larger than cultural truths. And so, yes, what you say is very true. So then you will need you need willpower to practice sattvic fortitude, sattvic joy, etc. How does one increase it? That, Subhash, that through practice. The will is developed by regular discipline. The will is a function, one of the functions of the buddhi, the highest part of the mind. The will really is the power to focus will towards a sankalpa, towards an aim, towards an end. That is the power of will. And so we develop will by purifying the buddhi, by learning to concentrate the mind, which eventually is also awakening the buddhi and allowing us to focus our attention and consciousness. And through regular practice. Practice of anything develops the power of will. So we used to refer to Swami Swarupananda's commentary, which is a translation with minimal comments. We used to have copies for sale and may still do. Yes, we do have copies of Swami Swarupananda's Gita, which is a very good one. It doesn't have comments. It has a few small little notes. It's a translation which is good for modern people, but again, it doesn't have much. It doesn't have explanation. It's just basically just a translation. And one other problem with it, which wasn't a problem earlier but is now, Sister Nivedita and Swami Swarupananda translated it. So it has Swami Swarupananda's name, but it was a joint effort between him and Sister Nivedita. And so her name should be there also. But it uses biblical these and thous, which even in the West, nobody uses that language anymore. Not even in churches, people don't use that. And so that is an obstacle for the modern reader, though that is still my favorite Gita. Swarupananda's Gita. And then Caleb, I haven't heard from you for a long time. Could you touch on the similarities between Plato's allegory of the cave and Vedanta's view on reality? And then the second question, how does Christ fit into Vedanta if he made exclusive claims about truth in the Bible? The first one about the similarity between Plato's allegory of the people in a cave who could only see the wall of the cave and the shadows made on the wall of the cave, and they took that for reality. That's has often been compared to the Vedantic view of reality, where what we're seeing are shadows, not reality. That the reality is actually, to expand Plato's analogy, the reality is actually the light itself that allows us to see. But we're concerned with the shadows of life, the shadows of the light, which is all of this. That's all that we see. And then about how does Christ fit into Vedanta if he made exclusive claims about truth in the Bible. That he fits in very well because, as Swami Vivekananda showed, Christ's statements can easily be interpreted in a different framework. Thomas Merton, the great Catholic Trappist monk of the 20th century, a very famous monk, especially in Catholic circles and in Christian spirituality circles, a very great man. He said, because he studied Zen, he studied Vedanta, he studied the Sufi tradition, etc. He said that if Christ's life and teachings had been carried to the Orient rather than to the Roman Empire, what a difference of interpretation that would have made. It was because his teachings were interpreted within the Judaic, Greek, and Roman worlds, the combination of these three. We get the interpretation of Christ that we get. That interpretation itself has its beauty. I'm not saying that it's not beautiful, and I'm not saying that there's not truth to it. But if that same life and the same sayings had landed in an Eastern context, it would have made a great difference. So where Christ says, no one comes to the Father except by me, Swami Vivekananda says that there Christ is speaking of himself not as Jesus, the human incarnation, but Christ was what? He was the incarnation of the Word. Christ was the incarnation of the Word. And so he was speaking as the Word of God. We can only come to the absolute through the thread of the relative. And that the thread of the relative that takes us there is the divine thread, which is manifest in the incarnation, whether that incarnation be Christ or Krishna or Rama or Jesus or Ramakrishna, it doesn't matter. And so the only problem, the problem is not with Jesus and his teachings. The problem is with the interpretation. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Yes, yes. That's what we believe about Sri Ramakrishna, what we believe about Krishna. You don't need to believe that about any of these teachers because the truth exists independent of teachers. But if you see the truth manifested in a great teacher in a clear and beautiful way, much more beautiful than your imagination could produce, then yes, that is the way, the truth, and the life. Why not? So, okay, so that does it for questions for tonight. Very good questions. Let me give a closing chant. Om Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marutastun Vandi Divyaistavai Vedai Sangapada Kramo Panashadair Gayandiyam Samagaha Dhyanavastita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyantiyam Yogino Yasyandam Navibhudu Suragana Devaya Tasmai Namaha. We bow to that Supreme Being whom Brahma and other gods praise with divine hymns, whose glories the singers of the Sama hymns sing through the Vedas and Upanishads, whom the yogis see with their minds absorbed in that through meditation, and whose end and beginning neither the gods nor the asuras know. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.